you shouldn't be forced to let other people into your house.
To go with the topic of nationalism, because it's come up recently in various forms. I was having a chat with Bob the Builder. I know you chat to him now and then.
Bob the Builder.
Yeah, Bob the Builder, who is a lovely individual. But we disagreed on certain things, and we brought up the topic of pan-Arab nationalism.
Oh, yeah.
And I was saying that the Arab nationalism of the 70s and 80s was preferable to the Islamism that is prevalent now in Middle Eastern politics. And he criticised me, saying that I'm surprised as a guy on the left you would promote national socialism. And I think he was trying to draw a parallel between Nazism and Arab nationalism. But then he went on to advocate for an independent Christian state in the Middle East. Isn't that a form of
it's the pot calling the kettle black.
I thought so, but it didn't occur to me till later.
Bob is a good guy. He sometimes says some things like those. He doesn't always realize it. But he's a good guy. He's a good person.
And I'm not saying he's wrong. Maybe the Christians do need a form of nationalism in the Middle East.
You know, I would actually agree with you about what you said about that Arab pan-nationalism is better than the Islamism, because nationalism is built on something more, how should I say it, that has more intrinsic value, even though it doesn't have a lot of value.
What about National Socialism then?
National Socialism.
Is it just socialism in name? I mean, if he was saying, how can you promote socialism for the Arabs as a nation, but not for the Germans as a nation?
Socialism? You mean nationalism for the Arabs?
I guess so. Yeah, I mean nationalism, national socialism. Technically, I mean you could call Scottish nationalism. They're socialist, aren't they?
Right.
Are they national socialists?
Well, I mean, it depends on the term that we're going to use to describe them, because obviously, I don't know, that the type of discussion with loaded terms is difficult. You know what I mean? Because like the Scottish National Party, their policies are nothing like the Nazis. So I mean, so these words are not really that helpful.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to say more than that.
Is it a form of ethno-nationalism? I think that's the problem, maybe.
Okay, well, I was going to say, because you said there that nationalism has some value, and I was thinking about it the other day. Is that what value does nationalism really have? And this guy's going to stop in front of the camera and be like,
"You're famous."
It's okay. It's okay.
It's all right.
You'll be famous.
Stares at it, be like, "What's this?" No, but I was saying. So, with nationalism, I mean, it's a way of. I imagine you could think of it as a way of rallying people together with some sort of shared identity.
Something they have in common.
But I mean, I would have to talk to people that would identify with that ideology and see if I could find some holes in it. Because I imagine that they might, like the guy that was at that talk with IC3 the other time, with the glasses and the cap. I'd like to see maybe what someone like him thinks about it, because I imagine that maybe they have in their mind an idea of what they would hold as something valuable. I doubt it's just that they were born in the country. You understand? It would be like, well, you can't look like this or believe that, and you're born here. Do you understand what I mean?
Definitely.
Right, because if it was like, well, if you were born within these borders, then you're part of my tribe, I very doubt anybody holds that view.
And that would be a kind of a state nationalism rather than an ethno-nationalism, which I think is more acceptable. Often nationalism is about uniting people against something, against a common enemy, against an occupier. I want to ask you about Ukrainian nationalism in a minute. It's certainly in Ireland, Irish nationalism originally was about uniting Catholic, Protestant and dissenter against the English. But then it descended into sectarianism, and you had loyalism versus republicanism, which was perceived as being exclusively Catholic, even though originally the United Irishmen were majority Presbyterian and Protestants.
Right.
But there you go. But what about Ukrainian nationalism? Are Ukrainian nationalists haters of Russia, or are they just proud patriots?
Some of them are.
Okay.
I mean, at this point, obviously, there's a lot of anti-Russian, I mean not a whole lot of, but some anti-Russian sentiments in Ukraine. Russia has declared an unofficial war on Ukraine. They're providing troops, they're providing weapons for the rebels in eastern Ukraine. They have occupied Crimea, just like that. They made a referendum at gunpoint in Crimea.
Okay, a referendum at gunpoint.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think the Ukrainians have many reasons to feel, attacked by the Russians. Okay. But still, I think, I still have some family living in Ukraine, and I sometimes hear stories from them about what's going on in Ukraine. And from what they told me, there actually isn't a whole lot of anti-Russian sentiments. Okay. People kind of feel more that it's a war against Putin than a war against the Russian people. Yeah. And I think that's a very realistic way of looking at things, because even though Russians are in the end fighting against the Ukrainians now, but Putin is the one who got them into that war.
Is identity in Ukraine a binary thing? Are people either strongly Russian or strongly Ukrainian? There must be people who are from mixed families. There must be people who say, well, I feel Russian, yet I'm a Ukrainian.
Yeah, there's lots of those. Russians and Ukrainians are closely related peoples. There's no question about that. And the thing I see in history very often is that this is one of the reasons why I usually disagree about people saying that these people were racist or those people were racist. Brothers were the peoples who were at war with each other the most throughout history. At least from my historical knowledge.
Yeah, sometimes the very close
exactly.
Or ethnic groups. I mean, I couldn't tell a Hutu from a Tutsi, but they murdered each other for it.
Yeah, for a small...
They're all the same race, the same religion.
Yeah, for just a few differences in terms of physicality, in terms of their faces. I think one of them had slightly wider eyes. The other guys had, or slightly less wide noses.
In Rwanda, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
The Hutus
but
and
I've
the
heard that this was like propaganda that the Belgian imperial powers sort of propagated and made people believe that some of them are taller or have got a different nose. I mean,
I heard that the Belgians preferred one of those two tribes. I don't remember exactly who they preferred, the Hutus or Tutsis.
And it was the tribe that was perceived as superior that ended up being the victims of the massacre.
When the Belgians left,
the Tutsis,
they started being the victim. I don't remember if it was the Hutus or the Tutsis.
I believe it was one of the fastest genocides in history.
Yes.
And also
like 3 million in a day or something. It was unbelievable. No, that's the exaggeration, but it was
not
incredibly
like that,
high.
But
incredibly high. The Catholic Church, I think, promoted this idea of the curse of Ham. And that one of the tribe were descendants of Ham, and one of them weren't the sons of Noah. So even religion was brought into it. But you just need to divide people into two groups, treat one better than the other, and they will hate each other.
Yeah, there will be a war of revenge eventually.
In history,
and wars of revenge are most of the wars of mankind. Who can tell for sure who started the first war, who started the first conflict? It can't be told, but there's always at least some kind of an excuse that the aggressor has for attacking the people that they attacked. Sometimes it can be argued to be more justified, sometimes it can be argued to be less justified. But what I think is that there are no saint peoples, there are no chosen nations, no chosen races that have the absolute truth, the absolute reality, the absolute morality of this world, that hold the world and are the way to its progress, to its future. I don't believe in that.
Are there chosen races for regions of the world? Are the Ukrainians the chosen people for Ukraine? Do they have the right to kick out invaders or migrants?
I see what you mean. Ukrainians are geographically in Ukraine, and I think people should have a right to exist. So seeing that Ukrainians have a right to exist, they have a right to their space, right? They don't have to necessarily share their space. Like, you don't have to you shouldn't be forced to let other people into your house and to do whatever they want with it. You know what I mean? That's why we still need borders nowadays. That's why we need countries, we need those things. But Ukrainians have a right to Ukraine because they are there. Okay. And it would be very troublesome to get them out of Ukraine. You know, if a Ukrainian goes to Russia, for example, let's imagine this for a second. You know, I have a historical example of this with the Persian Empire, when the Persian kings transferred lots of Greeks to Bactria. And eventually, when Alexander the Great conquered Bactria, he saw lots of Greeks there, lots of a huge community of Greeks in Bactria, and that's a very interesting occasion.
Where's that in modern day?
Bactria.
It's the desert, is it not? Because you got the Bactrian camel.
But what country would it be in now?
It's hard to say.
Okay.
It's hard to say. I don't think Iran is basically where Persia originated from. I think it's slightly more to the east of Iran.
Which might be Afghanistan.
Northeast.
Okay,
might be.
Yeah,
region.
Afghanistan, Iran, something like that. But don't take me up on that because I don't.
Kandahar in Afghanistan is named after Alexander the Great.
Maybe.
So
maybe.
he made it that far.
Yeah. One of the name that was applied to him by some of the Arabic peoples was Iskandar. That was one of the names. And the Scythians called him the Horned One because his crown had two feathers that looked a lot like horns. He waged a few wars against the Scythians. That's how the Scythians called him.
In the Quran, they mention a character called Dhuhul Qarnayn, the one of two horns, and I think some people say that suggests Alexander the Great.
Interesting.
But look, what I was saying.
Remember you said you weren't going to dominate today. I think William wants to get in.
No, but it depends what we're going to talk about.
It's just that I'm trying to answer the question.
Sorry, go on.
It'd be better to talk about something that we disagree with, most likely.
Yeah.
So we'll wrap it up. Final comment on nationalism.
The Bactrians were still Greeks. They had the culture of Greeks, they had the race of Greeks, they had everything of Greeks, even though they were not living in Greece. You know what I mean? If a certain people maintains all of its quality as it has in one country, and it goes to another country, I mean, they're still the same people, even though they're in another country.
So the
Israelites in Israel now, the Jews.
The St. Patrick's Day parade in Boston.
Right.
They're still Irish.
Yeah, but my point is just to finish up this, this small point, this segment, exactly. I mean, not nationalism, but this small part of the argument about nationalism. I think the Ukrainians have a right to live in Ukraine, and that right is being violated by the Russians. Not because of some racial superiority, not even because of an intrinsic hate between the two peoples, even though we have a very troubled history between us. But I think it's the ambition of Putin that is causing all of this. That's the main reason for all the animosity.